This is Debt Free in 30, where every week we take 30 minutes and get practical advice from industry experts about personal finance and living debt-free. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Last week on Debt Free in 30, my guest was Meg Penstone. We talked about what's on your credit report. Why are credit reports important? Well, because the information on your credit report is used to calculate your credit score, and your credit score impacts whether or not you can get a loan and the interest rate the bank will charge you. That all makes sense, but today I want to make the case that it's possible that a bad credit score could be good for you. More specifically, chasing a high credit score and ignoring all other aspects of your financial life is never a good idea. You don't need the highest credit score possible. In fact, sometimes a less than perfect credit score means that you are managing your debt and your finances wisely. To discuss this, I'm joined by my Ted Michalos co-founder and partner, Ted Michalos. Ted, are you ready to bust some myths around credit scores?
Happy to help.
Excellent. Okay, so let's start with the basics. What is considered to be a good credit score?
Right, there are two major credit reporting companies in Canada, and they use a scoring system that gives you a range between 300 and 900 points.
So you're talking about Equifax and TransUnion.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Now, there are actually more credit scoring companies, but nobody uses them, so we don't need to talk about them. According to the credit bureaus, the higher the score you have, the better. So a 300 would be very, very bad. A 900 would be perfect. A credit score of 500 is considered poor and may indicate you're not managing your debt very well. Now, Equifax tells us that they consider a score between 660 and 724 to be good. Over 729, very good.
And nobody ever gets to 900. It's just not. It's not possible.
I checked my own credit score recently, actually, and because I don't use a lot of credit, my score is pretty bad.
Well. But as
So
we're
we
going to
can talk
talk about
about
today, a bad credit score may be good for you, and that's an excellent point. We're going to talk about why your score is bad, obviously, because it's not using your system. So, okay, so what credit score is good enough then? I mean, is 660 good enough? Do I have to shoot for 720? Do I got to shoot for 800? Like where's the limit here?
Before you can figure out what's good, you need to understand what you're looking at. So, where are you at financially? Are you going to be applying for credit in the near future? That's probably the first question. The second is, what types of debt have you already got? So what kind of debt behaviors do credit bureaus reward? So what can you do to make your score better? What have you done in the past that may have made your score worse? So if you're planning on purchasing a car, applying for a mortgage or a bank loan, then a better credit score is good for you. It means you'll get better terms, lower interest. It'll ensure that you're not approved for the loan, but you can get a better rate. If you have a credit card and you're working towards paying down your debt, saving for the next car, borrowing or whatever, you may not be borrowing any new loans or applying for any new credit in the near future. This is especially true for older Canadians. In this case, there's probably no reason for you to worry about a high credit score.
Okay, well, so let's back up there then. So at the start of the show, I said that there can be a difference between what's good for you and what's good for your credit score. So why don't you kind of refresh everyone's memory as to what influences your credit score?
All right, so there's 6 factors that they're looking at. The first is your payment history, and that one's pretty obvious. So when the credit reporting agencies are tracking your history, they simply keep track of, did you make your required payments every month? If you don't make the payments, your credit score starts to deteriorate.
Makes sense. That's easy.
Next one is credit utilization. So how much credit do you have available to use, and are you bumping up against it? So someone with very little credit, which is the problem I'm running into, doesn't have as good a score as somebody with a lot of credit that uses it regularly. How long have you had your credit? So if you've only had credit for a very little while, so maybe you're a young person or you're new to Canada, or maybe you're an old person you've just never used credit cards in your life and now you need one. If you haven't had it for a long time, you don't have a lot of history, so your score won't be as good. Stability. So we're talking about how long have you lived at your current address? How long have you worked at your current employer? Does your financial picture today look like what it looked like yesterday? Is it going to look like that tomorrow? Do they think that you are stable? Next biggie is the types of credit that you have. So have you got a mortgage, a car loan, and a credit card? Or have you got 6 credit cards, a line of credit, and a bunch of bad stuff like that? The mix of the types of credits that you have will affect what your score looks like. And the final one is a little, it's not one people usually think of. How often are people doing credit inquiries against your score? The reason that's important is because when a bank or a lender does a hard inquiry against you, it's recorded on your credit report. And they're looking to see, well, are you out applying for credit all over the place at the same time? A general rule, and it's got nothing to do with today's show, is that if you apply for credit at 2 different places and you're turned down, do not try a third one for at least 3, 4, 5 months, because it looks like you're trying to amass a lot of credit quickly, and that will really hurt your score.
Yeah, it's being turned down that's the problem. I mean, if I'm shopping for a new car, I may go look at 3 different places and apply for 3 different places at once. If I'm approved at all of them, it's fine, but if I'm turned down, I got a problem. So, okay, so there's 6 things that affect your credit score: payment history, credit utilization, length of credit, stability, type of credit, and then how many credit inquiries you've had against you. So, okay, now we're getting to the key point here. So, obviously, the first one, paying your bills on time is good for you, and it's good for your credit score. So, where possible, pay your bills on time. I mean, that obviously
makes sense.
Yeah, it's going to save you money on interest and late payment fees too. So that one's an easy. But let's talk about credit utilization, because you already kind of hit on this. So, it's here where I think there can be a difference between what's good for you and what's considered good for your credit score. So, Ted, you and I are going to play a little game of let's pretend here. That's what the listeners always like. So, let's pretend that I have one credit card with nothing owing on it and a $2,000 credit limit. And let's pretend that you have 5 credit cards, each with a $10,000 credit limit, and you carry a balance of $2,000 on each of them. So which of us is going to have a better credit score?
Well, obviously, I have the better credit score.
Of course, yes.
Because I have higher credit limits. I've got good utilizations because I'm using them all, and I'm making my payments.
So is having 5 credit cards and carrying a balance on each of them actually good for you?
Well, okay, so let's stop pretending. I think that's very bad for you.
Okay. So it's good for your credit score, but it's not good for you. Okay, now
Correct.
That was kind of a bad example because
I think that's a pretty good example, because a lot of people that we see think they've got great credit because they've got all these different cards and they're making their payments every month. And so they don't understand why they can't get new credit when they apply for it. Why are they talking to me? They've got such great credit. Well,
yeah, and you don't. That's the point. So I mean, okay, obviously, neither you nor I are carrying balances on our credit cards, and I think everyone listening understands that carrying a balance on your credit card and paying interest every month is not a good plan. So let me run a different scenario by you then. So let's say that you have one credit card with a $10,000 limit. Let's say that I have one credit card with a limit of $3,000. Now, let's say that we both charge a couple of grand a month to our credit cards, for groceries and gas and other living expenses and, office supplies, all that kind of stuff. Pizza, a lot of pizza. Now, we're both smart guys, well, we like to think so.
We like to think we're smart guys.
Absolutely. Definitely good looking, but yes, smart as well. We pay off our credit cards in full each month, so we're not paying any interest. We both, are earning the same points on our cards and whatever, because we're both spending the same amount. So financially, we are even. But who has the higher credit score in this example?
I do. And the reason for that is, while we're both spending the exact same amount, I'm using less of my credit facilities than you are. Remember, you gave me a $10,000 limit, and you gave yourself a $3,000 limit. I only use 20% of my limit every month. I've got lots of access to additional credit if I want to. You're using 2/3 of your limit every month. So it looks like you're closer to the edge than I am.
Yeah, that makes sense. You've got lots of wiggle room. I don't.
Right.
I guess
that's a good way to say it.
Okay, so I got 2 comments on this then. So now first, you and I don't exactly know how Equifax and TransUnion calculates our credit scores. We don't know if the perfect utilization rate is 20% or 30% or some other number. We think that anything more than 30% is probably a negative, but we don't know for sure because, of course, if they told us, then everyone would game the system right exactly where they needed to be.
Right.
In the example I gave above, we're paying off our credit cards in full each month, so you could argue that we aren't really utilizing any of our credit, but let's keep it simple and assume that we're utilizing some of our available credit. So now my second point, you have a better credit score because you have more available credit, but is that really good for you personally? So again, is having access to more credit wise?
Yeah. Well, so it doesn't cost me anything to have access to that extra credit. I mean, they're not charging me a bill for my credit limit, but there's always risk associated with this, and we see it all the time. If you keep a low credit limit, then you can't ever get into a lot of trouble. So just because you've got, the example we just had, I had a $10,000 limit and I spend $2,000 a month. If something goes wrong in one month, I suddenly spend a lot more on it. Well, the difficulty is maybe I can't pay the card off that month, and so now I'm carrying a balance. If I have 2 cards, I've used one, well, maybe I don't ever use the second one. Now something's gone wrong. I run it up, and now I'm using it as well. So the risk is always there if you have access to credit that you will actually spend it. Remember, credit is good, debt is bad. As soon as you use your credit, it becomes debt. Debt is bad.
And so your advice is what then? That
limit the amount of credit that you have access to. I mean, one of the common things I say to people to come in and see us is, how many credit cards do you have in your wallet? I think ideally you have 2. You might make an argument for 3. You need one for personal expenses. Maybe you need one for business. If you have any more than that, then you just run the risk of, well, this one's full, I'll use the next one. It's better to plan your purchases ahead of time. Make sure you can pay down any expenses you put on your credit cards every month than it is to actually use credit cards and those sorts of tools as the way to finance your life. I mean, we used to say years ago, you were famous for saying, credit cards are a replacement for cash. They're not a replacement for lending. Right? Because they're just too damn expensive.
Yep. If you've got the cash in your bank, then there's no problem with using the credit card. You can go home and pay it off. It's a convenience, so you're not carrying a wad of cash when you go to the store.
You get into trouble when you use the cash and the credit card, and then you start using the second credit card.
And that's a huge risk. And I think that's an example of where trying to get a higher credit score is actually bad for you. So now, one of the other factors that you listed off at the start there that determines your credit score is how long you've had a loan. So the credit bureaus assume that the longer you've used credit, the better you are at managing credit, assuming you're paying your bills on time, obviously. So in other words, experience matters. So that makes sense, but that can also lead to bad behavior for you personally. So do you agree or disagree with that?
I mean, I fully agree. Let's say you've got a couple of credit cards, you switch to a new one because the new card offers you a reward program or just a better rate. If you cancel your old credit card, the credit bureau is going to hit you. You take a hit to your credit score because you've canceled an old one and you've switched to something new. If you keep the accounts open, you don't take the hit, but now we've got the risk that we just talked about. So there's no good way out of any of this except to limit how much you use any of these things.
Yeah, they want you to keep having more and more and more, and so when you do the right thing and switch, now that's a new card. You don't have the same history, so that's a bad thing. So okay, I think we've made the point that what's good for your credit score may not be good for you personally, but of course we like to keep bashing away at it. So let's talk about one more area that impacts your credit score, and that is the type of credit you carry. And you alluded to this earlier. So if you have just high interest credit cards, your credit score will tend to be lower than someone who has, a nice mix, a term loan, like a bank loan or a car loan and some other things. So should you go out and get a loan to improve your credit score?
No. You never borrow just for the sake of borrowing. If you don't have a specific need or purpose in mind, it just doesn't make sense. You're always going to use credit for what's right for you. And going to the bank and getting a loan right now doesn't sound like it's right. I mean, if you don't need the money for a car, if you don't need the money for a specific purpose, then, it doesn't make sense to go out and borrow just to try and improve your credit score. That's the short answer.
And that makes sense. Now, I guess if you're, you're going to be buying a house in 2 years, then maybe it's slightly different because, okay, I have to start building up my credit. But otherwise, you're saying, nope, don't do it. So, okay, now this is a bit of a tangent, but, I like to get you wound up on at least once every show. And, we're not going to talk about payday loans today, so I can't use that to wind you up.
I wondered how you were going to work that in, actually.
Okay, what do you think of credit repair companies then?
I think they are one of the largest boondoggles on the planet right now. And I think the credit reporting agencies are as much to blame as these credit repair companies. They've got people now paying monthly fees to monitor your credit, and they're telling you can get your credit score free online. It's not the credit score that the credit reporting agencies use, and the only way to repair your credit is to pay down your debt in time. I mean, anything else is just somebody selling you a bill of goods.
Yeah, and they like to, here, we'll set you up with this high-interest loan, which will report to the credit bureau, and that'll improve your credit. But like you said, you're paying massive fees. So
it just doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't.
You don't destroy your credit overnight. I mean, what goes wrong is you accumulate more and you can't deal with it, and that takes time. To fix the problem, takes time.
There's no quick solution. So,
Right.
and I actually wrote a blog post on one of those companies. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. Paying huge interest just to have a loan show up in your credit report is almost always a very bad plan. So, okay, let's get to the practical advice section of the show here, even though you've given us a bunch of practical advice already. We know that if you apply for a lot of loans in a short period of time and you're turned down, that can reduce your credit score. That seems crazy. You're applying for credit because you need it, yet the credit bureau says if you really need the money, you're a risk. But regardless, that's how it works. But this may be one case where the credit bureau is actually right. If you take on debt that you can't afford, you'll eventually find yourself getting late on your payments or worse, not making your payments. So if you're applying for a debt consolidation loan or a second mortgage to deal with credit card debt and the bank turns you down, what should you do?
Okay. If the bank turns you down, it means they think you have too much debt. If a bank thinks you have too much debt, you probably have too much debt.
Yeah, because they're in the business of giving you more debt. That's what they want to do.
That's how they make their money. So you should be considering alternatives. This is going to sound self-serving, but a consumer proposal is a logical alternative if you've gone to the bank for a consolidation loan and they've said no. It's better than getting a second mortgage or a high-interest loan from somebody else. Simply because there's generally no interest on a consumer proposal. And it will address the fact that your credit isn't as good as you think it is. It's going to force you to deal with the problem.
Yeah, and the problem is you got too much debt.
Right.
That's the problem. It's as simple as that. So okay, I agree with all that. So what are your final words of advice here then for people who are listening?
So I wish people wouldn't get so hung up on the whole credit scoring system. It's for the benefit of lenders. It's not for the benefit of individuals like you and me. It's about getting you to borrow more money as opposed to less money. I mean, my recommendation is you only borrow what you need, you pay it off as quickly as you can, and you manage your debt based on your finances, the money that you've got in, not by trying to manage your credit score.
Well, I totally agree. In fact, I think that's exactly the point I made on page 51 of my book, Straight Talk on Your Money, in the section called Worrying About Your Credit Score is Missing the Point.
Had to plug the book.
Had to plug it. So, well, look, we're getting close to the clock here. So I think that's good advice. Ted, thanks for being here today.
Happy to be here.
That's our show for today. Ted and I both agree. Your credit score is for the benefit of the bank, not you. You should not live your life trying to pursue the highest possible credit score. In many cases, a lower credit score, or even what is considered a bad credit score, is better for you than a higher credit score. The more credit you have, and the more you use it, within reason, the higher your credit score. But the more credit you have, the more risk you are taking. That was the first point Ted made. The more you borrow, the more you pay in interest. The big bank may like that, but it's not good for you. Keep your debts low, even if that gives you a bad credit score. And if you have more debt than you can handle, as Ted says, a consumer proposal is a good option in many cases. Getting rid of your debt, once and for all, is in your long-term best interest. We've covered a lot of ground today, so as always, you can find the show notes over at hoyes.com. That's HOYES.com. And I'll include a full transcript and links to what we talked about today, including our articles on why credit repair companies aren't worth it, and 7 facts you should know about your credit rating. Thanks for listening. For Ted Michalos, I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.